The His Girl Friday podcast is brought to you in part by Messenger Fellowship, living the kingdom, fulfilling the call, proclaiming the truth.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? It's yours truly, C-Fry, His Girl Friday, coming at you on a Friday night. It's about 7:45 here, May 31st, last day of the month. Kind of hard to believe. It's been one of the better months, at least for me. Not just the year, but the entire decade, really. It's been a very memorable, very satisfying, just plenty of positives to take away from it. And you'd think I'd maybe cut a pod to talk about some of the positive narratives, if you will, of the month. And maybe there's a time for that. I don't really know if my family story time is the right way to go for tonight. What I prefer is to discuss some signs of a healthy work culture, 13 of them to be exact. Some of you listening to this may recall my last pod, in which I broke down a two-part series on toxic work environments. What makes a work culture toxic, unhealthy, what causes morale to suffer, so to speak. It's 7 points over 2 posts. Went in thorough, and from what I've gathered in the 2 months since those posts, the mark's been left. So I felt like it was right to circle back to that narrative. This is in part 3. I just wanted to provide a complementary piece discussing some traits indicative of what a healthy work culture looks like. Healthy being not just, a company that's thriving by the metrics, by the bottom line, but also working learning environment, where accountability is shared, where voices are heard, where leadership is doing its job as part of a very thorough top-down structure. There's a lot that goes in when we talk about culture and environment. They are different, but they go hand in hand. So how do we, what are some of the characteristics of a workplace, a marketplace, where people are just maturing in their strengths, their skill sets, their knowledge base, even, pruning the weakness of the individual. I mean, there's just a lot you could say here. It's not so black and white, which is why I'm cutting this. You can't simply take a toxic checklist and go by the opposite or apply the reverse, where it's just like, yeah, I won't do this and I'll be fine. I won't do this and I'll be fine. Well, you have to not only know what not to do, but you have to know what to do. You can't just apply the reverse so simply like it's a card game. So I figured I draft a list, share some commentary about some of those points. 13 is a lot, and I only want to spend a minute or two on each of them. And really, I want to encourage dialogue. I want this to be a conversation that flows. So I want to hear your thoughts. I want you to engage the comments, shoot us a DM, or even reach out to us personally one-on-one if you have any questions about this content. We'd love to hear from you. So this is no particular order, and this is not, and I want to be clear, just like with the last post, this comes from 15 years, almost 15 years of working experience. And also, I'm not just applying my experiences, but Lys's too, because Lys and I are, we're a package deal, and I've learned a lot from her experience as well. So this is not just one place that inspired all these points. This is a cumulative list that has been stored underground for years and years. And now that I'm in a new environment that really hits the mark on a lot of these points, I feel like it's right to break it down a little bit. So again, healthy, thriving, non-toxic work culture. Number 1, fosters a learning environment that gives each employee opportunities to sharpen professional skills and understanding relative to their role. So someone who is brought into a company, someone who is hired, a new prospect, they should know what they're agreeing to. They should have a job description that the company puts out. And, even before day one, the new hire should know what the expectations are. However, that new hire should also have some degree of awareness that this is a place where they're not just going to apply what they know, but they're going to also learn some things along the way as well as part of that sharpening mentality. My last gig did a great job at this. In fact, the hashtag always learning was frequently uttered in a lot of correspondences, and I love that. Shout out to Foundation Group, did an amazing job with the always learning mentality. A lot of it, though, was learned on the go. You had to rely on your peers, you had to rely on colleagues and manuals, and another shout out to them is that they put best practice in writing. That's going to be another point I come back to. But a good, healthy learning environment is a mark of a thriving work culture. It's not just, here's the job, do it, based on how it's been done before. I mean, that's part of it, and maybe that's the foundation from which you're starting from. However, within the first year or two, there should be opportunities to mature in that, to grow in that. Are there opportunities? Are there courses you could take? Are there e-workshops that you can do? Even some of the new content involving AI. Are there opportunities for you to push pause on the day-to-day stuff for an hour or two a week, or maybe time set aside each quarter and you hit the books? There's training sessions. I mean, are there opportunities in-house where you can go behind the scenes? And perhaps it's, not so much worst case, but in your work culture, are the directors inviting and welcoming of, hey, let's grab lunch. I have some questions, some work-related questions I want to ask of you, and just wanted to gauge some input and insight and understand the background, the history. What are some things that will help as I, aim to anchor down here? Those are just some raw thoughts that I've seen work, both in my life, Liz's life, and also some colleagues that I know who are friends to this day. Point number 2, hires qualified, emotionally mature, high-character people to fill leadership and middle management positions. Now, that really should go top-down. Even your quote-unquote bottom rung positions, oftentimes there's going to be more admin, client-facing, the dirty work positions. Let's just call them for what they are. You want high-character people across the board, but especially when it comes to those who are kind of in the middle of things, who are accountable down as well as top, and they're managing a team, they're guiding a team, they're directing a team, but they also have someone who is holding them accountable as well. An ideal work culture, everyone knows what is right, and they are following in stride. They are being obedient, compliant. Yes, absolutely. The choice to, all right, this is how the lay of the land is. I'm not going to stir the pot. I'm going to go low, go slow. I'm going to be humble. And my approach to my work and how I interact with people internally and externally. We have to understand that a lot of times it starts with us and the choices that we make. We may have people in our midst that are struggling. Maybe they're not choosing the right course of action. It's not just the people in leadership or who are in the middle management positions in those seats, but it really is a culture that reproduces itself. Those are people who are willing to be selfless as opposed to self-serving. A healthy work culture, everyone is unified in their desire to be mature and their desire to be high character on the job and to not just showcase their qualifications, but let that operate organically as they serve one another. So that's really what I mean by point number 2. Point number 3, empowers leaders to guide their teams while developing, maintaining efficient systems and process procedures. So leaders can't, there's a difference between a leader and a manager. A manager has a tendency to just, not in a negative way, but they're providing the instruction, the guidance, the direction, right? But leaders go beyond that, and actually they're the developers, and that's a big difference to me between a leader and a manager. Managers don't really develop as much, they enforce. And I think that, I'm not saying that if you have an enforcer middle manager that automatically your work culture, it's toxic and you got to get out of there. But I think ideally a good manager, if they're not already a good leader, is on some sort of trajectory to becoming that. And one of the best ways is to sit down with people, have conversation with them, have real meaningful correspondences in the purpose of how do we make this better? Let's not just be content on the status quo, but let's really deconstruct what we've been doing here as needed, or maybe just to a certain point, and let's just take that humble approach. How do we make things better? And what is your perspective? What is your voice? What do you think is working? What do you think is not working? And having routine checkpoints along the way where that voice is integrated into the conversation. So I think number 3 is all about developing people, but also using developing people as a way to develop process procedures. Number 4, promotes an atmosphere of transparency, accountability, and feedback. This sort of ties into number 2. If honesty is not a priority, if you're going to allegedly say, hey, I'm open for constructive criticism, or to hear your voice, as I was talking about number 3, but I'm going to shoot it down or just come at you really hard. I've been in situations where you would share your thoughts. You would be honest. If you're struggling, you would be like, hey, I'm just having a hard time and just need some help. I've seen what you would hope for is that there's grace, compassion, understanding on the other end. Unfortunately, that's not always there. That series, it's not always you're always not gonna find it. A healthy work culture promotes transparency, accountability, and feedback, and charges people up and encourages them as well as empowers them, and can take something that even if it just overshare a moment of weakness, of vulnerability, and just like, how do I help get this person on the other end back on track? How do I align them back to a place where they can go forth and not just be of good cheer, but just how to walk in their God-given authority and influence? How do I play a part in restoring confidence that may be lost, shattered, broken? Maybe there's offense. They just need to be honest with someone about a client who chewed them out on the phone. The person's no longer regulated. It's important if you're in a leadership position to make room for that, but also not to shoot it down and discourage, because it'd be doubly destructive and deflating. Number 5, prioritizes clear top-down communication, collaboration between departments. I've seen silos take effect several places, and that's a common problem. I feel like each department kind of has their own flavor, has their own appeal, and sometimes there's a fraternal nature that develops. And working together across departments is an important part that almost begs its own spinoff. But we have to be consistent in how we professionally communicate and deal with one another. And it's not just, people get prideful, they're content with their stats with their own team to the point where they look down on others, and thus that affects how they interact. Sometimes, people get swept under the bus if there's, compromise and respect between departments. So I think we should, as far as be with us, aim to work peacefully, amicably, honoring one another in our teams and also in other departments. And point number 6, abides by the Jethro principles, maintains orderly structures. I've talked about this before. Understandably, you're the person who is offering guys from the very top, the CEO, the CFO, the president, the founder. I think the middle manager is a very key point. If you have a company of 100 people, it's going to be hard for that one person to govern the other 99. You need directors, you need people in the middle who can serve as report tos, and that was started, we find that in Exodus, the conversation between Moses and his father Jethro, hence the term Jethro principle. So orderly structures is maintained through the flow of top-down communication is important. Really, 6 is kind of like a subset point. Some of these others. Number 7, we alluded to, puts best practice into writing. Habakkuk 2 comes into play here. You can't just talk it out. You can't just sound it out. You got to make best practices memorable. And by that I mean leaving a trail of breadcrumbs for people to know what the truth is, what the expectation is, and to have a reference point going back. And there's no struggle in executing the demand because it's clear as day right here in front of me. You need a point to build off of, and even for the purposes of archiving historical information and data, knowing how things used to be done. Sometimes you try something else, it's not working. Let me go back to 3 years ago and see what the process was back then. Don't just overwrite things, but just keep good lists of just past, present manuals. Even keep a list of things you want to improve, so that the present will eventually capture the future, right? So you kind of have to have all three time senses present in this, but you can't just talk it out in meetings. You got to, once you come to agreement on something, or sometimes you're going to be a middle manager or leader who just be like, this is the direction we're going to go. This is the clearance we've been given. We may not all be in agreement, but this is the way, this is the expectation. Let's make it clear so there's no confusion. And I think that good communication eradicates any potential for confusion or, people having to interpret between the lines and suddenly their autonomy is taking over. All right. Number 8. Understands the value of networking, giving back to the community, having a way to not just serve by your service, but having a way to serve the community together outside of what people can purchase from you. That's what I'm really getting at here. It's encouraging when you're working under a supervisor who they're involved with other people in their stream, so to speak, and they're pouring into those who are like-minded, who have similar goals in their career, and they are part of cohorts where people gather, even if it's just annually, and they talk about the pluses and minuses, like cultural developments. There's probably going to be some political facets here and there, but for the most part, it's this is where our society is. This is where we're headed as a country, as a nation, and what does it look like to be a salesperson in the 21st century and all this, and that's what I'm getting at. Having an opportunity to broaden your horizons and think big picture, big world. Number 9, treats, handles, takes care of all employees equally and fairly. Golden rule, but not just limited to that. I think this is common sense. Consistency is sometimes the hard part for everyone because we're not going to click naturally with everyone. It's not going to be as easy to give person A the benefit of the doubt as person B. There's some truth to opposites attracting, and when we see someone who is reminds us of ourselves some way and we don't like that element of ourselves, I'm just giving an example, but there's tendencies to maybe stiff arm some people and not the other, and that is consistency is so difficult because we want it to be kind and compassionate, and we want to show spiritual fruit to everyone equally. I think in our hearts it's what we want, but the ground truth, what verifies, is often different, and we hide behind what comes naturally. The organic overflows, right? Some people are going to grind our gears, and I think we just have to understand that the other person is not trying to. More often than not, the other person is not trying to grind gears. They're probably just trying to survive, or they're just trying to... It's not just even, I want to do what I think is right. I think sometimes we assume autonomy, we assume ego, and I think being slow to assume that is good. That's why conversations and just opportunities to engage without agenda is so critical in all of this. Because it's not always going to be ego. Sometimes people are just having a hard time. And I think regardless of what position you serve, I think knowing what survival mode looks like in all of this, I didn't actually write this down, but just know what someone who is holding on for dear life, who is just trying to get through, know what that looks like and seek to deconstruct that, because if your company is to thrive, I don't think anyone should be in survival mode, just being straight up. So that maybe I'm getting off track here, but just make sure that if you're, especially in leadership, if you're a director, make sure that you are modeling the equality and fair treatment, and that you're not just pouring forth all your attention, all your energy into certain people. Number 10. Facilitates a positive working relationship, one sense of belonging, inspires performance through trust, not fear. Yeah, fear tactics, no place. You can't have an agenda that breeds anxiety and say that you stand for positive working cultures and environments. Everyone wants to belong and fit in. Give people an on-ramp. Give people an on-ramp to connect. Even if it's just a voice, some people are going to be very cryptic and very quiet, and they just want to get in and get out and just do their work. And, it's going to be hard. Just give opportunities. As far as the word counts, it's going to vary, of course. People's personalities are very different, but make sure that when you're giving opportunities to people to share their insights and their concerns, that it's because you trust them, not because you're just going through the motions, or certainly don't manipulate by threatening or as I talked about in my last post, where you start to communicate not through what you say, but what you don't say, and setting up strategic voids where you're only communicating when there's something that merits concern or there's a red flag or something. So working relationships, they got to be facilitated, they got to be fostered, and every person has a sense of being able to click like puzzle pieces fitting into the place. It's not so much, I want to feel good about myself and how, my social status, but it's just people want to feel like they are a puzzle piece that fits, that clicks in with the rest. Are we giving people opportunities to sense that click? Number 11 advocates occupational psychological safety, work-life balance, mental health. Mental health is not just as a current fad. It's really important. It just was not taken into serious consideration in past generations, and now we're catching up to that. Psychological safety, you can have a lot working for you, but if the psychological safety is on ice the whole time, if it's sitting on eggshells, maybe you have an idea of what a good work-life balance looks like, but you're sowing seeds of fear, not trust, then that's just, people are going to be afraid to mess up, and when that those inevitable screw-ups do happen, I think people are going to feel extra weight and burn down and be like, not so quick to be like, yeah, I got this next time, or, oh man, I feel good about what I can do differently next time. People can be encouraged moments of correction, and I think that that's part of facilitating and advocating occupational psychological safety. But if that's not happening, then certainly show that you care by asking questions about the family, making sure that everyone has what they need. It's sensitive conversations, sensitive topics may ultimately arise, but if you have someone who's struggling who's not making enough for cost of living and doesn't have the money for gas to make it into work, we got to be willing to go deep to a certain depth with people to know what they're struggling with, even if it has to deal with family finances and personal matters and needs. Like, that's just part of being a good friend. Let alone a good supervisor or a good director. There needs to be someone in leadership who understands, has an opportunity to know what the person is. And I think on the other side, there has to be vulnerability and courage to be like, hey, I'm having a hard time. Like, there's some things, there's some setbacks that are not our fault, that are unforeseen, and we just are struggling with the burden, struggling with the load right now. Just see where it goes. Make the case like you want to be available, you want to be present, you want to be able to be maximally efficient and being in position to be a key part of the process. Work-life balance is going to have some ebbs and flows with people, but make sure that you are aware of how a person is thriving and how they're maybe not thriving. Maybe they are surviving not so much at work, but at home. We have to get to know people, and we can't be ignorant to their story and what God is doing in their life, right? So that's 11. Number 12, knows the difference between influence and control in the context of social stewardship. It's kind of a mouthful. People naturally want to extend their influence, but when it becomes control, it's no longer influence as far as my 2 cents is concerned. I think influence, there's a purity in it, and there's also humility in it where, the person extending the influence so wants to coach or offer insight or be able to inspire an awareness, new knowledge, morale, something that's going to generate growth when people are unified in whatever that influence is covering, like an umbrella. Control is like, I'm going to manipulate, I'm going to summon what I feel like is best. There's a little bit of self-service in that. So we got to know the difference between influence and control. Make sure we're not confusing the two. Lastly, discourages fraternal vibes, kind of alluded to the silos, gossip, politics, all forms of manipulative maneuvering. I think we know this through our own dealings. If gossip is happening, then first of all, we can't assume that the gossiper is looking to stir discord or dissension. Sometimes it's more it could be a poor execution where they want to capture concern, but it's really none of their business to say it. I think sometimes people just want to be able to have a way to talk with people, have conversation points. But if that's you, we have to know what constitutes gossip, what doesn't, and just know what topics, what conversation points are slippery slopes when all is said and done. As far as fraternal vibes, I mean, this kind of goes hand in hand with the clickiness of some work cultures. Silos are going to exist. Don't be discouraged if you find yourself on the outskirts of them, but don't have an agenda to break down. You don't have to be part of a fraternity or in a certain silo, in a certain clique. You don't have to be a director to have influence on your clientele, the person right next to you in the cubicle next door, so to speak. There's just no place for manipulation, no place for sowing fear and anxiety, no place for guilt tripping, shaming, gaslighting. So what are some of the things that you would add to this list, or maybe even take off? Maybe you feel like there's not really 13 points, maybe it's more like 10 to 11 because some are more sub-points of others. What are your thoughts? What's a healthy, thriving, non-toxic work culture to you? Would love to hear from you. As for tonight, I'm peacing out. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. I hope your month of June gets off to a solid, rocking start. That it's the best month of the year for you guys. And then just as always, if you have any prayer points, if you have any, or even praise reports and you want to share with us, there should be no confusion how to reach us. You got comments, you got the prayer request section of this website, you got our social media feeds, streams, DMs. You could text and call if you have our numbers. We're here for you. All right. Love you guys. Catch you on the fry as always. Peace.